It's time for the first podcast episode of Keanu's Corner. Appreciate you guys taking the time to evaluate this new format that I've decided to take with the show. Going from a live video stream to an on-demand audio format may not be ideal for some as they're used to the Instagram live stream, but it allows me to release content more consistently and across a larger network. So the show is currently listed on every podcast directory for your convenience. So if you like what you hear, please go ahead and hit that follow button on whatever podcast platform you're on. Before we get started, I just want to say the opinions that are expressed in this podcast are strictly my own. I'm taking a more mature direction with this format in order to invoke conversation between you, your friends, and your teammates. Episodes are going to vary in time. Some will be monologues. Some will be interviews within the airsoft community that may go a little over, but the overall consensus of this podcast is for your enjoyment and to spark conversation. Since we are all starting to get excited for the outdoor milsim season to start again, I figured we'd talk about something that often gets overlooked and is constantly bitched about, but it's absolutely critical for our safety, fairness, and the reasonable enjoyment of the game. That brings me to reading the rules for each game that we attend. Yeah, I know. We've probably lost half the listeners at this point. I don't need to read the rules. When we step onto the field, we're not just playing a game, though. We're engaging in a sport. Yes, I said sport. Airsoft demands respect, responsibility, accountability, and adherence to a set of guidelines designed to keep us all safe and ensure a level playing field. The rules aren't just a bunch of words on a website or Facebook page. They're a blueprint for protecting ourselves and each other. They detail the prerequisites of wearing the proper safety equipment, keeping our airsoft guns within permitted velocity limits, and treating them with the same respect as real firearms. It's not just about avoiding injuries, it's about preventing accidents that could have lasting consequences as well. But safety isn't the only reason why reading the rule set is important. It's also about fairness. Every player that participates in the game deserves an equal opportunity at accomplishing the same goals, and the rules ensure that nobody gains an unfair advantage. From calling hits to respecting medic and respawn guidelines, the rules level the playing field and ensure that the outcome of the game is determined by skill, strategy, teamwork. Not by bending the rules, taking shortcuts, and basically cheating. And let's not forget about the importance of enjoyment. We're playing airsoft to have fun, right? Nothing kills a good vibe faster than confusion, frustration, or arguments over what's allowed and what's not. By familiarizing ourselves with the rule set before we hit the field, or even better, registering for an event, we can focus on what really matters. Playing the game, bonding with our teammates, creating memories, and doing all that cool guy shit. So let's take a look at why participants may not read the rules or why they don't read the rules. People may choose not to for various reasons, and there's a few that I've come across in my years of being on both sides of the game. First and foremost, we have assumption. Some people may believe they already know the rules or assume that they are similar to the rules that they've encountered before. This assumption can lead to overconfidence and a lack of motivation to review the rules thoroughly. Another one is time constraints. In today's fast-paced world, people often feel rushed and prioritize other activities over reading the rules. They may want to go to a pub and hang out with friends or go to a barbecue or do something with their families, and they just don't have time to sit and read a big, long document. They may just prefer to dive into the game rather than taking the time to understand what the game host has actually laid out. And speaking of big, long documents, next one I have on my list is complexity. Rule sets can sometimes be lengthy or written in technical language, which may intimidate or overwhelm some people. Complex rules and lengthy documents can deter people from reading them thoroughly. And let's be honest, we're not all built the same. Some people may have reading disabilities, dyslexia, things that may keep them from actually reading the rules completely and thoroughly. But this should not be grouped in with a lack of interest or laziness. Not everyone finds the rules exciting or engaging to read. Some individuals may view rules as a necessary but boring aspect of airsoft, and may prefer to skip over them in favor of more enjoyable aspects. And then we look at experience and ego. Experienced players may feel confident in their ability to navigate the game based on their past knowledge and experiences. As a result, they may believe that reading the rules is unnecessary or redundant. And that leads into my next and final point: social influence and peer pressure. People may be influenced by the behavior of others around them. That's not uncommon. If they see others not reading the rules or disregarding them, they may be more inclined to do the same, assuming that it's acceptable or normal. So we've looked at the points of why a player may not read the rules: assumption, time constraints, complexity of the rule set, learning disability, lack of interest or laziness, experience and ego, or social influence and peer pressure. But what if someone has read all the rules and follows them to the letter, but the rules are still causing the game to fail? This then falls on the game host and rule enforcement. Game hosts may fail to enforce their rules for a bunch of reasons, and we're going to get into that. Now, before I get into the game host side of things, let me say this. Not all game hosts are built the same, and that's a good thing. Individual game hosts provide different aspects and fresh ideas to the game, making games different and more interesting. When it comes to the rules of the game that the game hosts write out, some excel at what they do, and others fall short of the mark. I'm not singling out any individual game host here, but if the points that I make strike a nerve, it might be time to reevaluate what you're doing. So where do game hosts fail when it comes to rule enforcement? Well, that's not an easy question to answer, but it does come down to a lot of different variables. Much like players not reading the rules, game hosts have an issue as well. Lack of understanding. While the hosts have most certainly written their own rules, their staff or volunteers may not fully understand the rules themselves or the importance of enforcing them. This can result in inconsistency and a perceived leniency from the player's aspect. We also have fear of confrontation. Enforcing rules sometimes involves addressing rule violations or confronting participants who are not following the guidelines. Staff may avoid these confrontations to maintain a positive atmosphere or to avoid conflict. And I'll be honest, it isn't easy approaching an irate player screaming at staff that this fucking guy is not calling his hits. So I can completely understand game control's position here. And then there's other aspects like the desire to please participants. I mean, that's what the game host is really trying to do anyway. Game hosts may prioritize keeping participants happy and engaged over strict rule enforcement. They may fear that enforcing the rules too rigorously could result in negative feedback on social media or participants deciding not to return for future events that they host. What about lack of resources? This can be common. Some hosts may simply lack the necessary resources such as staff or equipment to effectively enforce rules. Without sufficient support, enforcement is extremely challenging, which leads to rule violations going unchecked. Sometimes hosts overlook minor violations. Hosts may choose to overlook minor rule violations in the interest of keeping the game flowing smoothly, which is understandable. While minor infractions may not significantly impact the overall experience, repeated violations can completely change the flow of the game. That brings us to ignorance of consequences. Game hosts may not fully comprehend the potential consequences of not enforcing the rules, such as unfair gameplay or damage to the reputation of the event or the venue. There are even instances where hosts change their rules mid-game in order to better balance a lopsided battle. While the intent is noble and designed to keep players on the field, it really damages the integrity of the actual event by rewarding failure. So now that we've looked at why players may not read the rules and why game hosts may not enforce their own rule sets, how do we fix it all? As players, we need to be the champions of the sport and ensure that our friends, teammates, and the squads that we work with will all have read and understood the rules for each event. Educating each other on understanding the importance of rules and their role in ensuring safety, fairness, and enjoyment can encourage individuals to prioritize reading them. As hosts, it's as simple as making rule sets less complex, educating staff and volunteers to the rules well in advance of game day, asking and answering questions and making sure that everyone is prepared to consistently enforce the rules, call for additional staff when required, and to stay away from calling audibles if the game balance is lopsided. Sometimes it's okay to rip the Band-Aid off instead of dragging it out longer than needed. In the end, it's essential for hosts to recognize the importance of consistent rule enforcement to ensure a safe, fair, and enjoyable experience for all participants, regardless if the game is going to go the distance or not. Now, overall, we've looked at players, we've looked at game hosts. Our job together as a community, when it comes to the rule set, we need to take the time to read it, understand it, and follow it to the letter. Because when we all play by the same rules, we can truly experience the fun, excitement, and pure adrenaline rush that airsoft has to offer. In the instance with the rules, knowledge truly is power. So let's make sure that we're all on the same page. Quite literally in this instance. And that's all I really have for this episode. If you're looking for me on socials, you can find me on Instagram at keanu.airsoft. I'll include links in the episode description for your convenience. Feel free to send me a direct message if you had feedback or topics that you'd like to hear discussed, or you yourself would like to discuss with me on the show. We can do interviews. In future episodes, I will be talking to people across the airsoft community, just like you and me, and we'll have prizes to give away from some very generous sponsors that have jumped on board. Thank you for listening. Be sure to check in on those low maintenance friends, and until next time, keep doing that cool guy shit.